So for this month, we've been looking at this idea of AI, artificial intelligence, and how does it relate to us? Because sometimes, you look at the headlines nowadays and there's all this stuff, right? Different people have different opinions, different thoughts about what this means. The other day, I don't know why I did this, I decided to Google on the website IMDb, which is about all the different movies on the internet. And there's a database of all these different movies. So I searched this one term, cheating death. What are movies about cheating death? All right? Now, again, how IMDb came up with this algorithm, I don't know. But what do you think were the top 3 results that came from this idea of movies about cheating death? What do you think?
Final Destination.
Final Destination, okay. What else? What do you think?
I might date myself, but
Flatliners, okay.
The Greatest Story Ever Told.
Greatest Story Ever Told, okay. All right. So, okay, again, I didn't come up with these results. This is what IMDb came up with. They suggested Final Destination, I know it's a little bit hard to read, Final Destination Bloodlines. They also suggested The Lion King and Frozen. Again, I didn't come up with this. This is what it spit out. But it's interesting, right? This whole idea of, a lot of times people are, that's one of the fundamental parts of us. Trying to figure out things like, well, what is the purpose of life? Why do we do what we do? Why do we exist? And with that then is sometimes this idea of how do we actually somehow either make our mark or live beyond or somehow extend? Recently there was a study on this idea of legacy. What motivates legacy? What motivates someone's intention to want to somehow establish legacy, whatever that means? Now, I'm not going to go through the entire study, but there were 5 different points that this particular study came up with. And it was looking at this idea, well, what is it that drives people to want to consider their legacy? Or maybe another way of looking at it is, how do we actually go beyond what we are right now? Because each of us, in some way, shape, or form, likely want to somehow be remembered, or somehow we don't want to be forgotten. And so whether that's extending your life as long as you can, or maybe in different ways, right? What does it mean to go beyond our own existence? This is something that we wrestle with a lot of times as not just a culture, but as humans. And so there's different ways that this happens. It's interesting because there's different ways that people have approached this. Recently, a few years ago, there was a series on Amazon called Upload. And the whole premise of the series was that when you died, your consciousness was uploaded to a digital space. And that's where you would live. Again, so some people have this idea that somehow when you die, you're somehow able to upload yourself into this digital space and live forever there. That's what this series that's what this whole series was about. But there's also different ways that people try to approach this, right? So whether it's even this whole idea of transhumanism. Transhumanism, some people have defined as a way of humanity trying to essentially go beyond death, trying to extend or cheat death. So whether this is different ways of adding on to yourself, right, technologically, to be able to extend your life. We do a little bit of this already. So people with pacemakers, that's one technology that's used to extend a person's life. But there's other things. So at what point, people have asked the question, at what point do you start adding to yourself where you no longer remain human? So whether you've looked at stuff like Star Trek, right, with the Borg and how you've been added on different stuff. At what point do you cease to be human now is part of the question. There are some places where now there are things called grief bots, where you can take a person's data, social media otherwise, you can upload it, and now a person can interact with that deceased person. Now again, how you feel about this depends on what your view of humanity is. What does it mean to be human? So this morning we're going to look at some different passages, and Elizabeth's going to read the first one for us here. So come on up here. All right? This first one, you can read off the screen here. This first one, actually, sorry. My bad. I forgot something here. Right? But one of the things that AI does is this. AI tries to mimic humans. That's one of the purposes of AI. It's trying to mimic humans. The other day, someone just mentioned how they responded to something, and all of a sudden it seems like a robot responded back. And this person said, no, I want an actual human to respond back to me. Right? It's this difference of what does it mean to, but AI tries to be human. Go back to last week when we were defining what exactly is AI in the first place. And really, part of AI is it takes all these different data, it tries to figure out a pattern, an algorithm, and tries to relay back to you what you think you're supposed to hear, or what it's trying to predict what you're doing. So even in this example, the idea of person C, right, if they're behind these two screens and they're getting these messages from a computer and from person B, can they differentiate what's human, what is not? So it's based on this idea of prediction. So let's try a few of these. So you're going to help, actually, why not? You can help me with this too. But the rest of you can try this too. So try to finish this phrase. An apple a day
keeps the doctor away.
Keeps the doctor away. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's a predictive one, right? Okay. So what do you think, if I gave you this one, what do you think I would say after this? A journey of 1,000 miles. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, what do you think I would say after this one? A penny saved?
What's a penny?
That's not what I would say, right? What's a penny?
A coin.
I would say it's more than what I have, right? So here's the thing, right? Because AI is trying to predict what you think you should be hearing next. So it's trying to mimic that, right? It's trying to pretend to be that. But just like this particular proverb, you might say a penny saved is a penny earned. I would say a penny saved is more than I have, right?
I will believe that.
Huh?
I got more than a penny.
We won't talk about finances right now. But that's the thing, right? And so when we get this idea of, yeah, you're going to read all my notes now. Once we get to this idea, right, of what does it mean to be human, we're going to read this first passage. And this is what a lot of you might come to sometimes. This is from Genesis chapter 2, verse 7.
Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person.
Okay, cool. So you can have a seat for a second. I'll call you back up in a moment, all right? So some of you are familiar with this passage. This is part of the creation story, this idea that God creates, and then he creates humans. He creates the first person. And out of that, it says here that God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Now, let's break this down a little bit. Now, I know it's a little bit hard to read the Hebrew here. But there's three components that a lot of times when people take that verse, they break it down to these kind of three parts that somehow that consist of people. The first one is this idea of a physical body, right? That we are made from dust, that we are made from material. It's from material that we are put together. So this is physical body that we have. It also mentions then that from this, that we were given the breath of life. That word breath, sometimes we translate it as spirit. So really, the idea that God breathes his spirit into you. Remember, last week when we looked at this idea of when God made us in his image, that's what part of it. It's because of his spirit breathed into you that we actually have imago Dei, God's image, that we are made in the image of God. But somehow then this comes together, in this last part it says what it's translated here as living person can also be can be contained as soul. So there's something here about a person's soul. Now soul is this really complex, sometimes almost kind of weird concept. What exactly is a soul? But Scripture says that there's something about the soul that is meant to be foundational or fundamental to who we are. So, Elizabeth, next one. Ready? There we go.
And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength, and all your strength.
Thank you. Right? And so this idea then, you can have a seat for a moment. All right? I know, I'm going to make you go up and down here. And so this idea, right, is that even what's called the Shema, the idea that when, for the Israelites for centuries, they were commanded, directed that every day that they would go through this and pronounce, love the Lord your God, right? And it says here in verse 5, to love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And so sometimes, again, this idea of soul, we somehow have this intuitive sense that soul is who we are, but really, what is a soul? What makes up a soul? How do you define a soul in the first place? The word soul here is the Hebrew word nefesh. And for those of you, we're going to dig into this a little bit. Later on, tomorrow, if you get our emails, our weekly emails, you'll see actually there's a link to a Bible project video on this too. So that's another way to kind of explain this idea of what nefesh is. But nefesh is the word used for soul. Now, soul is something that is both kind of within you, but somehow you can interact with your soul, which is kind of a weird thing. Like there are times in the Psalms, if you read, it says that, bless my soul, right? Why are you so downcast, O my soul? It's almost like as if the person is having this interaction with the person's own soul. So what is it about the soul? What is it that makes up the soul? In fact, Jesus talks about this too. Come on up, Elizabeth. Next one. Yes, again. Right? Because Jesus mentioned this in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37.
Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind.
Thank you. Right? And so even Jesus reiterates this idea based on when someone asked him, what's the greatest commandment? Right? It says that you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Now, we can get into a whole discussion later about, well, why is it that in one part Jesus adds strength and Mark, but then another one, there's this whole thing about, well, again, what makes us us? But really, these passages are about this idea that love God with all of who you are, which really encompasses your soul. There's a guy named John Ortberg who was a pastor down in Chicago and later on in California. And he delves into this a little bit. And so this is a bit of a quick video intro about what he talks about the soul.
Your soul is the deepest thing about you. It is the eeriest, most mysterious, most evocative, crucial, sacred, eternal, life-directing, fragile but indestructible, and nowadays quite controversial part of your existence. Jesus himself said that the soul is worth more than the world. So why in the world would you not value it above all else? Wouldn't it be a good thing to know what it is and how to take care of it? Wouldn't it be worth knowing how to honor it, nurture it? Two things are certain. One, you have a soul. And the other, it's the only one you will ever have.
So if you want to, you can also delve into John Ortberg's book on soul, what he calls soul keeping. It's actually a pretty good resource. But again, we'll link to it later. You can find it afterwards and take a look deeper that way if you want. Here's how he would define what a soul is. And again, people have been having this conversation for centuries now about what exactly is the soul. So this is not the final understanding of what a soul is. Rather, this is one way to try to understand and frame what exactly, when we talk about the soul, what does it mean? How do we define it? Here's one way of defining it. And really, it's based on this idea of these different components that actually that actually build and form your soul. So it starts from the center. It starts from the will. The will is your decision, your ability to choose. Right? Go back to what we talked about last week. One of the things that we mentioned is that one of the things, because you are made in God's image, you have the right, you have the ability to choose. You can either choose to follow God because you trust that what he says and does is actually correct, or you can choose something else, maybe even your own pathway. But you do have the ability to choose. This is what a will is at the end of the day. I remember there was often when I said to my kids that you may not be able to choose your circumstances, but you can choose how you respond to it. You have the ability and the will to choose. Not to control everything else, but you yourself. That is what your will is. Your will is this ability to be able to decide what pathway you decide you want to go on. And that's central to who you are. So first you start with the pathway to choose. The next part that he would extend out is that your mind. The way you comprehend, your cognition, not just the neural activities, but what exactly is it that forms your consciousness? Your ability to actually think, your ability to make connections. I mean, AI is trying to mimic this, right? Trying to figure out algorithms, trying to figure out all these different ways that you take all these different stimulus, all these different things that are happening. How do you make sense of it? That's what the mind part is now. How do you actually begin to not just process information, but how does it actually begin to make sense to you? To the way what's around you, how you begin to perceive. That's what the mind is. The third one is body. And body is not necessarily just your physical. What he would suggest is that your body actually relates back to your habits, to your desires. To things that, there's one part where the Apostle Paul keeps on saying, he mentions over that, what I want to do, I don't do, but what I don't want to do, I end up doing, right? He has this wrestling. Why? Because we have these instincts or we have these desires within us. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Ortberg would suggest that then how these desires are then actually formulated into habits, things that you begin to do on a regular basis. This is part of your body. This is what makes up your body. And with these things, and other components like the social environment around you and such, but these are the things that actually begin to actually become your soul. Again, it's not the only way to look at it, but this is one way to look at this whole idea of what exactly is your soul now. Because some people have tried to break this down a bit, right? And even go back to the whole GriefBot stuff. The idea that somehow you can upload all this data and somehow that data becomes you. Well, is that now who you are? Is that you? Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you to read this one last one for us. This is Matthew chapter 16, verse 36.
And all that you do benefits if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul. Is everything worth more than your soul?
Right?
No.
So, what is it? It's something about your soul that somehow God has given within you that is you, right? It's more than just your body. It's more than your memories. It's more than your personality. It's somehow, there's something about being able to sit with another person, and there's something within you that says that this person is alive and has a soul. Some of you might look at other people and think whether they have a soul. You can question that. That's a different story. But the fact is, we are given this soul. We are given the ability to choose. We have a will. We've been given an ability to think. And with that, then, we begin to form different habits. And with that, we have different desires. And all that, then, is you. It's who you are. I've often wondered, like, what would it look like for those of us who hopefully get to live with Jesus in eternity? What would that actually look like? Jesus' resurrection gives us a glimpse of what that is. So he has some kind of physical body, but it's not exactly the same body that we have, right? So this idea of then looking at that somehow it's your soul that is part of who you are, that's what's going to be part of our eternity. And that within that, right? If you had met me when I was just born, I know. What happened, right? I mean, but if those who met me when I was in my early stages, and that's the only time they met me, that somehow, if we met each other in eternity, they would still somehow recognize me, right? Later on, when I'm like, if you met me when I was around 8 years old, again, if you never met me after that somehow in eternity, when we meet, somehow we would recognize. There's something about our soul that's not just how I physically look now that we recognize. This is how we recognize right now. If you saw me back then, you may not recognize necessarily me. This is a little bit harder of a picture. This is when I was in high school. I'm the middle bottom one there. I'm kind of like the bad guy of badminton. Yeah, whatever. But again, if you met me then and if that's the only time we met, there's something about me that when we meet in eternity, even though I don't look the same as that, but somehow there's something in us that recognizes each other. For those of you who maybe get to see Elizabeth in 20 years, she's not going to look the same as she is now. But again, there's something in eternity that when you look at when you be able to see that in eternity, you get to recognize who she is. So there's something about the soul, right? That, as Ortberg is suggesting, that we have to somehow honor and care for. That somehow we have to continue to be aware of what all these other things, how does it actually form your soul? Because your soul, Jesus actually says, your soul is something you can actually lose. How do you lose your soul? We're actually not going to get into that right now. The fact is, you can actually lose your soul. So what does it mean to actually then to keep your soul, to build your soul, who you are? That includes your will, that includes your mind, that includes your heart. All of that is what makes you you. But if other things begin to crack at that, your soul becomes disintegrated. And you are no longer who you are, really. So the bottom line with this whole stuff about AI, because the fact is this, is that sometimes you might remember, if you ever watched Avengers Endgame, there's that one part, spoiler, okay? I'm going to spoil part of this if you haven't seen it yet. There's one part, though, where Iron Man, Tony Stark, he dies. Afterwards, though, he has a scene where there's a projection of him giving a message to his family, especially to his daughter. Now, it's interesting, right? Because you look at that, and somehow you know that this is actually Tony speaking to his daughter, even though it's a recording of him speaking to his daughter. And yet we also recognize that if you took Tony, if you upload it to a computer, and then his daughter interacts with it, somehow we have the sense that somehow this is not Tony who's speaking to his daughter. Why? Because somehow there's something about a person's soul. That's how we connect. It is through our soul that we begin to experience what it means to actually seek the divine, to find who God is. That is how we connect. So, whatever your take is on stuff like grief bots, and to some degree, some of it could be therapeutic to some extent. But the recognition, though, is that at the end of the day, that is a set of data that is spitting out, trying to be predictive in how that person responds. But is it that person? Is it their soul? So, I'm going to encourage you this week. Maybe if you get a chance, go on some kind of Bible app and maybe look up the word soul, especially in the Psalms. And maybe read those over. Pray over those. When the psalmist says, bless my soul, what does that mean for your soul to be blessed? When it says that, why are you downcast, O my soul? What is it that burdens your heart? What is it that begins to work at your will, your mind, your body? And with that then, knowing that when we connect, when we talk, at the end of the day, it is our soul, it is somehow our souls that are relating to one another. So with that, I'm going to encourage you. Look at what it means to care for your soul. What does it mean to keep your soul? And with that, how do you allow your soul to grow? If you want, we can talk about this later during Lunch and Learn too. And so, dear God, you have given us your breath, which is somehow tied to our soul. And with this, we ask that you would help us to know how to honor that, how to keep our soul, how to build it, how to care for it, so that us, by following you, we would be ready, that we would be able to relate not just to one another, but to you, Jesus. So help us to do that, we ask, in your name. Amen.